When I saw the HOA president beating my mute 5-year-old daughter with a belt, she had no idea I was a federal prosecutor. She thought my silent child couldn't tell anyone. She was wrong. Now this monster would face justice she never imagined possible. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching, also like and subscribe for more stories. I pulled into my driveway at 6:47 p.m., exhausted from another brutal day at the federal courthouse. My briefcase felt heavier than usual, stuffed with case files that would keep me up until midnight. But the moment I stepped out of my car, I heard it, a sound that made my blood turn to ice. A sharp crack. Then a child's muffled cry. My daughter Emma's cry. I dropped everything and ran toward the sound. My heart hammered against my ribs as I rounded the corner of our townhouse. What I saw in that moment would haunt me forever. Emma, my beautiful 5-year-old daughter, was pressed against the fence of our small backyard. Her tiny hands covered her head. Standing over her was Patricia Morrison, the HOA president everyone called the General. In her hand, she gripped a thick leather belt, raised high above her head. "I told you to stay off the grass." Patricia screamed, her face twisted with rage. The belt came down again. Emma's silent scream, mouth open, no sound emerging, was somehow worse than any cry could have been. My daughter had been mute since birth, and her silence made the violence feel even more cruel, more cowardly. "Stop!" The word exploded from my throat like a gunshot. Patricia froze, the belt still raised. She turned to face me, and for just a second, I saw fear flicker across her face. Then her expression hardened into defiance. "This child has been destroying HOA property for weeks," she said coldly, lowering the belt but not dropping it. "Someone needs to teach her discipline since you clearly won't." I was already running. I scooped Emma into my arms, feeling her small body trembling like a frightened bird. Her cheeks were wet with tears, and when I gently moved her hair aside, I saw the angry red welts on her arms and shoulders. Not just from today. Some were older, fading to yellow and purple. This had been happening for a while. "How long?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "How long have you been hurting my daughter?" Emma held up her fingers. 7 times. 7 days. 7 beatings. While I had been at work, prosecuting criminals, a monster had been torturing my child in our own backyard. Patricia crossed her arms. "The HOA rules clearly state." "Get out of my sight," I said quietly. Too quietly. Now. Something in my voice must have warned her. Patricia backed away, still clutching that belt, and disappeared around the corner. I heard her footsteps fade, then the slam of her door 3 houses down. I carried Emma inside and laid her gently on the couch. My hands shook as I examined the marks on her small body. Belt welts on her arms, legs, and back. Some looked days old. Others were fresh, the skin broken and bleeding in places. My baby girl looked up at me with those enormous brown eyes, so full of pain and confusion. She didn't understand why someone would hurt her. She had only been playing in the grass, chasing butterflies, living the innocent life a 5-year-old should live. I pulled out my phone and took photographs. Every mark, every bruise, every welt. Then I held Emma close and let her cry silently into my shoulder while my own tears fell into her dark hair. That night, after I had cleaned and bandaged her wounds, after I had tucked her into bed and sat with her until she finally fell into an exhausted sleep, I went to my home office. I opened my laptop and began to research. Patricia Morrison. Age 53. President of the Riverside Gardens HOA for the past 8 years. Married to Robert Morrison, a retired banker. No children of their own. I dug deeper. 3 complaints filed against her with the County HOA Oversight Board. All dismissed due to lack of evidence. 2 families had moved out of the neighborhood suddenly in the past 3 years, selling their homes at a loss. One homeowner had filed for a restraining order against Patricia, then withdrawn it a week later. She was a bully. A tyrant who ruled our small community with an iron fist, hiding behind HOA regulations and her position of power. But she had made one critical mistake. She had hurt my daughter. And I was a federal prosecutor who specialized in civil rights violations and abuse of power. Patricia Morrison had no idea who she was dealing with. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Emma needed me home, and more importantly, I needed to start gathering evidence. I contacted Dr. Sarah Chen, a pediatrician who also served as an expert witness in abuse cases. She came to our house within 2 hours. These injuries are consistent with repeated physical abuse using a belt or similar object, Dr. Chen said grimly as she examined Emma. The child has welts in various stages of healing, indicating this has occurred multiple times over the past week to 10 days. Some of these strikes were delivered with significant force. She took her own photographs and wrote a detailed medical report. Emma sat quietly through it all, occasionally reaching for my hand. My brave little girl. I'm required by law to report this to Child Protective Services, Dr. Chen said gently. I know, I replied. I already filed a report this morning. I also filed a police report. What I didn't tell her was that I had also reached out to contacts in multiple agencies. The FBI, the State Attorney General's office, the County Sheriff's Department. I was calling in every favor, activating every connection I had built over 15 years as a prosecutor. Patricia Morrison thought she could hide behind her HOA position. She was about to learn that no position provides immunity from federal law. Over the next 3 days, I interviewed neighbors. It started with Mrs. Yang, the elderly Korean woman who lived next door. Oh honey, she said, tears filling her eyes. I saw it happening. I called you several times at your office, but they said you were in court. I didn't know what else to do. That horrible woman, she would wait until she saw Emma playing outside, then she would come over and, her voice broke. Why didn't anyone stop her? I asked, though I already knew the answer. We were afraid, Mrs. Young whispered. She's the HOA president. She has power over our homes, our lives here. Last year, the Hendersons put up a swing set, and she fined them $5,000 and forced them to remove it. The Patels painted their front door blue instead of the approved beige, and she put a lien on their house. We were all too scared to challenge her. I spoke with Mr. Henderson next. He was a military veteran, a man who had served 3 tours overseas, and even he had been intimidated by Patricia. I'm ashamed to say it, he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. I watched her hit your little girl twice. I should have stopped her. I should have done something. But Patricia threatened to foreclose on our house if we interfered. We have 3 kids of our own. I couldn't risk making them homeless. His wife, Maria, sat beside him crying. I'm so sorry, she kept repeating. I'm so sorry. I interviewed 12 neighbors over those 3 days. Every single one had witnessed Patricia's abuse of power. 6 had personally seen her hitting Emma. None had intervened because they feared retaliation. The Patel family shared their own horror story. Patricia had not only fined them for their blue door but had also called immigration services on them despite the fact they were American citizens. She had reported their teenage son to the police for suspicious activity, when he was simply playing basketball in their driveway. She is a racist, Mrs. Patel said quietly. She targets anyone who doesn't look like her. Your daughter, with her Asian features, Patricia would say terrible things about her when she thought no one was listening. My blood boiled hearing this. Patricia hadn't just abused Emma physically. She had targeted her because of how she looked, because she was different, because she couldn't defend herself. I documented everything. Statements, photographs, videos from doorbell cameras that several neighbors provided. One video showed Patricia hitting Emma 3 times with the belt while my daughter tried to shield herself. The timestamp was 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, exactly when I had been presenting closing arguments in a corruption trial. Another video, from the Henderson security camera, showed Patricia approaching Emma on a different day. Emma had been sitting peacefully on the grass, making a flower chain. Patricia yanked her up by her arms so violently that Emma's feet left the ground. Then came the belt. 5 strikes. Emma trying to run away. Patricia grabbing her and striking her again. I watched these videos alone in my office, my hands clenched into fists, tears streaming down my face. My baby. My innocent, sweet baby had been terrorized while I was away working, believing she was safe. My rage grew colder and more focused with each piece of evidence I collected. On the 4th day, the police came to my door. Detective Martinez, someone I had worked with on several cases. "Sarah," he said, using my first name. "We arrested Patricia Morrison this morning. She's being charged with 7 counts of child abuse, assault with a weapon, and assault on a minor causing bodily harm." "Good," I said. "But that's just the beginning." Detective Martinez looked confused. "What do you mean?" I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Patricia Morrison assaulted a child under the age of 6, causing bodily injury, on property subject to federal housing regulations. This HOA receives federal funding through the Department of Housing and Urban Development because 20% of the units are designated as affordable housing. That means she committed her crimes on federally funded property. Understanding dawned on Martinez's face. "You're going federal with this." "I'm not just going federal," I said quietly. "I'm going to make sure Patricia Morrison never hurts another child again. Ever." While the local charges moved forward, I began building the federal case. I reached out to Marcus Webb, the U.S. attorney for our district. Marcus and I had worked together on dozens of cases over the years. He was a father of 4, and when I told him what had happened to Emma, I heard the fury in his voice. "Send me everything," he said. "Every photo, every statement, every piece of evidence. I'll get the FBI involved today." The FBI investigation uncovered far more than I had expected. Special Agent Lisa Rodriguez was assigned to the case. She was a specialist in organized fraud and abuse of authority. Within 2 weeks, she had uncovered a pattern of criminal behavior that stretched back almost a decade. Patricia Morrison hadn't just been a tyrant. She had been running a criminal enterprise. The HOA collected dues from all 75 homes in our community, about $300 per month per household. That was over $200,000 per year. Patricia had been skimming money from that fund for years. The FBI's forensic accountants estimated she had embezzled nearly $800,000 over the past 8 years. She had created fake vendors, billing the HOA for landscaping services that were never performed, maintenance work that was never done, security upgrades that were never installed. She paid these fake companies with HOA funds, and the money went straight into her personal accounts. But it got worse. Patricia had also been accepting bribes. Several property management companies had paid her cash under the table in exchange for contracts with the HOA. She had been shaking down residents, threatening them with fines and violations unless they paid her directly to make problems go away. The Hendersons hadn't just been fined $5,000 for their swing set. Patricia had also demanded an additional $2,000 in cash to expedite the removal process. They had paid it out of fear. At least 15 families had similar stories. Illegal fines, followed by demands for cash payments. Anyone who refused faced escalating harassment, more fines, violations, threats of legal action, even threats of foreclosure. Patricia had turned the HOA into her personal empire, ruling through fear and enriching herself at everyone else's expense. Agent Rodriguez presented me with a thick file of evidence. Bank records showing the stolen money. Recorded phone calls where Patricia threatened residents. Email trails documenting the fake vendors and bribes. "This woman is a predator," Rodriguez said. "She specifically targeted vulnerable people, immigrants, elderly residents, single parents. People who couldn't afford lawyers, who didn't understand their rights, who were too scared to fight back. And Emma, I said quietly. She targeted Emma because my daughter couldn't tell anyone what was happening to her. Rodriguez nodded, her expression grim. Patricia Morrison is one of the worst abusers of power I've encountered in 20 years with the FBI. She knew exactly what she was doing. She chose her victims carefully. Your daughter was mute, so she couldn't report the abuse. The immigrant families didn't understand the system well enough to fight back. The elderly residents were too frail and frightened to resist. The case against Patricia expanded from child abuse to a sprawling federal prosecution involving wire fraud, civil rights violations, embezzlement, extortion, and abuse of authority. Emma slowly began to heal, both physically and emotionally. The welts faded over the weeks, leaving faint scars that Dr. Chen said would eventually disappear. But the emotional wounds took longer. Emma had nightmares. She would wake up crying silently, her small body rigid with fear. I would hold her until the terror passed, whispering that she was safe, that no one would ever hurt her again. I hired Dr. Michael Torres, a child psychologist who specialized in trauma and nonverbal communication. Dr. Torres was patient and kind. He spent hours with Emma, using art therapy to help her process what had happened. Emma started drawing pictures. At first, they were dark, black scribbles, angry red marks, images of herself curled up small while a large shadow loomed over her. Dr. Torres explained that this was normal, that Emma was expressing the fear and pain she couldn't speak aloud. But gradually, the drawings changed. Color began to appear. Emma drew pictures of butterflies, of flowers, of sunshine breaking through clouds. She drew pictures of herself and me holding hands. She drew our house surrounded by a protective wall of light. She's reclaiming her sense of safety, Dr. Torres told me. She's beginning to understand that what happened to her was not her fault, and that she has people who will protect her. I took a leave of absence from work. My supervisor understood completely. Take all the time you need, he said. Family comes first. Always. During those weeks at home, Emma and I grew even closer. We planted a small garden in the backyard, the same backyard where she had been attacked. I wanted her to associate that space with beauty and growth, not with fear and pain. We planted flowers that attracted butterflies. Emma loved butterflies. Before the attacks, she would spend hours chasing them through the grass, her laughter silent but her joy evident in every movement. I wanted to give that joy back to her. Mrs. Young helped us. So did Maria Henderson and Mrs. Patel. The neighborhood women rallied around us, bringing food, offering to babysit, helping with the garden. They were trying to atone for not protecting Emma, though I had already forgiven them. I understood fear. I understood how Patricia had terrorized everyone. One afternoon, about 6 weeks after the initial incident, Emma and I were working in the garden when a butterfly landed on her hand. It was a monarch, orange and black, its wings opening and closing slowly. Emma's face lit up with wonder. She looked at me and smiled, a real smile, full of pure happiness. Then she gently raised her hand, and the butterfly flew away. She signed to me, "It's not afraid anymore." I realized she wasn't just talking about the butterfly. She was talking about herself. The preliminary hearing happened in September, 3 months after Patricia had first raised that belt against my daughter. I didn't prosecute the case myself, that would have been a conflict of interest. But I sat in the front row of the courtroom gallery, Emma beside me, both of us watching as Patricia Morrison stood before the judge. She had hired an expensive lawyer initially, a man in a $3,000 suit named Gerald Blackwood. He was known for defending wealthy criminals and had a reputation for getting charges dismissed through technicalities and aggressive tactics. Blackwood immediately tried to have the charges reduced or dismissed. "Your Honor, my client is a respected member of the community," he argued. "She has served as HOA president for 8 years without incident. This is clearly a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by an overly protective parent who happens to be a prosecutor with an agenda. The judge, an older woman named Catherine Reeves, looked unimpressed. Counselor, are you suggesting that 7 documented instances of beating a 5-year-old child with a belt constitute a misunderstanding? Your Honor, my client was merely enforcing HOA regulations in what may have been an overzealous manner. By assaulting a kindergartner? Judge Reeves's voice could have frozen water. The child is 5 years old and has a documented medical condition rendering her unable to speak. She cannot defend herself, cannot call for help, cannot even scream when she's being beaten. And your client specifically targeted her, knowing this. Blackwood tried again. Your Honor, if we could just review the HOA bylaws, you'll see that my client had authority. No authority gives anyone the right to beat a child, Judge Reeves interrupted. I've reviewed the medical reports, Counselor. This child has belt welts at various stages of healing. Some of the strikes broke her skin. This wasn't discipline. This was torture. I watched Patricia's face. For the first time, I saw her confidence crack. She looked small suddenly, diminished. Her husband Robert sat behind her, his face buried in his hands. Later, I would learn that he had known nothing about any of it, not the beatings, not the embezzlement, not the extortion. He would file for divorce within a month. Bail is set at $500,000, Judge Reeves declared. The defendant is to have no contact with the victim's family, or any children under the age of 18. She is also barred from serving in any capacity with the Riverside Gardens HOA or any other homeowners association. Next hearing is scheduled for 6 weeks from today. Patricia's lawyer paid the bail. She walked out of the courthouse a free woman, at least temporarily. But I saw the fear in her eyes as she passed our row. She knew what was coming. The federal charges came down 2 weeks later. The FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office had worked quickly. Patricia Morrison was indicted on 47 federal charges including 7 counts of assault on a minor under federal jurisdiction, 12 counts of civil rights violations, 15 counts of wire fraud, 8 counts of extortion, 5 counts of embezzlement of funds from a federally funded housing program. Each count carried significant prison time. If convicted on all charges, Patricia faced up to 70 years in federal prison. Gerald Blackwood tried to negotiate a plea deal. Marcus Webb refused. Your client beat a disabled 5-year-old child 7 times with a belt, Marcus told him coldly. She stole nearly $1 million from her neighbors. She ran an extortion racket that terrorized dozens of families. There will be no plea deal. We're going to trial, and we're going to win. Blackwood must have conveyed this to Patricia because within days, she fired him. She couldn't afford his fees anymore anyway, the FBI had frozen all her bank accounts. She ended up with a public defender, a young woman named Jennifer Moss who looked overwhelmed by the scope of the case. The trial began on a cold November morning, 6 months after Patricia had first raised that belt against my daughter. The federal courthouse was massive and intimidating. The courtroom itself had high ceilings and dark wood paneling. At the prosecution table sat 3 federal prosecutors, including Marcus Webb himself. They had boxes of evidence, dozens of witnesses lined up, forensic accountants ready to testify about the embezzlement. Patricia sat at the defense table looking smaller than I remembered. Her hair had gone grayer. She had lost weight. The arrogant, powerful HOA president who had terrorized our neighborhood for years looked like a frightened old woman now. I sat in the gallery with Emma on my lap. My daughter was dressed in her favorite blue dress with butterflies on it. She clutched a stuffed rabbit in her arms, a gift from Mrs. Young. The prosecution's opening statement was devastating. Marcus Webb stood before the jury and laid out not just what Patricia had done to Emma, but a pattern of abuse spanning years. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Marcus began, his voice calm but powerful, this case is about power and how one woman abused that power in the most despicable ways imaginable. Patricia Morrison was trusted with authority over a small community. She was supposed to maintain standards, to keep the neighborhood pleasant and safe. Instead, she turned that authority into a weapon. He showed photographs of Emma's injuries on a large screen. Several jurors winced and looked away. One woman in the jury box was openly crying. "This is Emma Chen," Marcus said, gesturing to where we sat. "She is 5 years old. She has been mute since birth, unable to speak or cry out for help." Patricia Morrison knew this. She specifically chose to target this child because she knew Emma couldn't report what was happening to her. He walked the jury through each incident. The videos played on the screen: Patricia grabbing Emma, the belt coming down, Emma's silent screams, her desperate attempts to escape. The courtroom was utterly silent except for the sound of people crying. Then Marcus moved to the financial crimes. He showed the jury Patricia's bank records, the fake vendor payments, the bribes, the extortion. He showed emails where Patricia threatened residents, where she coordinated her schemes, where she bragged about how much money she was making. Patricia Morrison didn't just abuse her power, Marcus concluded. She weaponized it. She turned a homeowners association into a criminal enterprise. She targeted the most vulnerable people in her community: children, immigrants, the elderly, and she exploited them ruthlessly. She deserves no mercy. She deserves the maximum penalty under law. The defense's opening statement was brief. Jennifer Moss knew she had an impossible case. She tried to argue that Patricia had made mistakes, that she had let power go to her head, that she was essentially a good person who had lost her way. The jury looked skeptical. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution brought in witness after witness. Dr. Sarah Chen testified about Emma's injuries, explaining in medical terms how much force was required to leave those welts, how much pain Emma must have been in. Dr. Michael Torres, the psychologist, testified about the emotional trauma. "Emma has PTSD, he explained. She has nightmares. She's terrified of authority figures. The psychological damage may last years, possibly her entire life." Mrs. Young testified, tears streaming down her face. "I watched that monster hurt that poor child. I will never forgive myself for not stopping her." Mr. Henderson testified, his military bearing crumbling as he admitted his failure to intervene. "I fought in Afghanistan. I faced enemy fire. But I was too scared to stand up to a HOA president. I let a little girl get hurt because I was afraid. I'll carry that shame forever." 12 neighbors testified about witnessing the abuse. 20 more testified about Patricia's financial crimes, the illegal fines, the extortion, the threats. The Patels described how Patricia had racially targeted them. The elderly Martinez couple explained how Patricia had stolen their life savings through fraudulent violations and fines. Then came the FBI's forensic accountants. They walked the jury through charts and spreadsheets showing exactly how Patricia had embezzled the money. $873,000 over 8 years. Money that should have gone to maintaining the community, making it better and safer. Instead, it had gone into Patricia's personal accounts, funding her lavish lifestyle, expensive vacations, designer clothes, jewelry. The evidence was overwhelming. The videos were undeniable. Patricia's own emails and text messages damned her. She had written to a friend, "These idiots will believe anything. They're all too scared to challenge me. It's like taking candy from babies." In another email, she had written about Emma specifically, "That mute kid is always in my way. Someone needs to teach her a lesson." The prosecution rested after 2.5 weeks. The defense called only 3 witnesses, character witnesses who tried to say Patricia had been a good neighbor years ago, before power corrupted her. Their testimony was weak and unconvincing. Patricia herself did not testify. Her lawyer advised against it, knowing that Marcus Webb would destroy her on cross-examination. The defense rested after just 1 day. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes. When they returned to the courtroom, I held Emma close. She signed to me, "Are we safe now?" "Soon, Baby, I whispered. Very soon. The judge asked if the jury had reached a verdict. The forewoman, a middle-aged black woman who had cried during Emma's video testimony, stood up. We have, Your Honor. How do you find the defendant on count 1, assault on a minor? Guilty. On count 2, assault on a minor? Guilty. 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 47 charges. 47 guilty verdicts. Patricia Morrison's face crumbled. She aged 10 years in those few minutes, all her arrogance and power stripped away, leaving only a broken woman facing the consequences of her cruelty. Several jury members were openly crying. The forewoman looked directly at Emma and mouthed, I'm sorry. Sentencing came 2 months later, in January. The courtroom was packed. Every neighbor who had testified came. Victims of Patricia's financial crimes filled the gallery. Local news cameras waited outside. Judge Harold Chin, the federal judge overseeing the case, was known for harsh sentences in child abuse cases. He had presided over dozens of such trials and had once said publicly, "Nothing disgusts me more than adults who prey on children." He reviewed the case thoroughly before announcing his decision. Ms. Morrison, he said, looking directly at Patricia, you held a position of trust within your community. You were given authority to maintain standards and ensure a pleasant living environment for your neighbors. Instead, you abused that power systematically and deliberately. You targeted the most vulnerable, children, minorities, families, the elderly, and you used your position to terrorize them. He paused, shuffling through papers on his bench. But most egregiously, you specifically targeted a 5-year-old child with a severe disability. A child who could not cry out for help, could not tell her mother what was happening, could not defend herself in any way. You beat this child 7 times with a leather belt, leaving scars both physical and psychological. You did this knowing she was defenseless. You chose her specifically because she was defenseless. That makes your crimes particularly heinous. Patricia was crying now, her shoulders shaking. Her ex-husband Robert sat in the back row, his face expressionless. The federal sentencing guidelines suggest a range of 8 to 12 years, Judge Chin continued. However, given the severity of your crimes, the vulnerability of your primary victim, the pattern of abuse spanning nearly a decade, and the sheer callousness with which you operated, I am sentencing you to 22 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Gasps filled the courtroom. 22 years was far more than anyone had expected. Additionally, Judge Chin continued, you will pay restitution of $873,000 to the victims of your embezzlement, and you will pay $300,000 in damages to Emma Chin specifically for the physical and psychological harm you inflicted upon her. He struck his gavel. Furthermore, upon your release, if you survive your sentence, given your age, you will be permanently barred from serving in any position of authority within any homeowners association, community board, or similar organization. You will be required to register as a violent offender. And you will be subject to lifetime monitoring. Another strike of the gavel. This court hopes that your time in prison will give you an opportunity to reflect on the pain you have caused. But more importantly, this court hopes that this sentence sends a clear message to anyone who believes they can abuse positions of power: there are consequences. Justice will find you. And you will pay for your crimes. Patricia was led away in handcuffs. She didn't look at us as she passed. She looked at nothing, her face blank and empty. Emma squeezed my hand. I looked down at her, and for the first time in months, I saw her smile. A real smile, full of relief and peace. She signed to me, the monster is gone. Yes, baby, I signed back. The monster is gone forever. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded us. I made a brief statement with Emma by my side. Justice was served today, I said, my voice steady. My daughter was targeted because she was vulnerable, because she couldn't speak, because a person in power thought she could abuse that power without consequences. I want every child to know that they matter, that they deserve protection, that no one has the right to hurt them. And I want every person in a position of authority to know that power comes with responsibility, and abuse of that power will not be tolerated. Emma tugged on my sleeve. She held up her drawing pad. On it, she had drawn a picture of the two of us, holding hands, standing under a bright sun. Above us, butterflies filled the sky. No dark figures. No fear. Just light and freedom and hope. That evening, our neighbors threw a celebration in the community park. Someone had rented a bounce house. There was music, food, laughter. Children ran freely across the grass that they were now allowed to play on. Mrs. Yang had been elected the new HOA president. Her first official act was to eliminate 90% of Patricia's ridiculous rules. The second was to return all the illegally collected fines to their rightful owners. The third was to turn Patricia's old house, which had been seized by the federal government, into a community center with a playground for children. Emma played with the other neighborhood kids that night. She couldn't speak to them, but it didn't matter. They had learned basic sign language just to communicate with her. They had made her one of their own. I watched her spin in circles on the grass, her arms outstretched, her face tilted toward the stars. She was free. She was happy. She was healing. Spring arrived warm and beautiful. Our neighborhood looked different now, not just physically, but spiritually. The fear that had hung over Riverside Gardens for years had lifted. Families were happy. Children played freely. People smiled and talked to each other without constantly looking over their shoulders. Emma started kindergarten. Her teacher, Miss Rodriguez, was patient and kind, learning sign language to communicate with her. Emma made friends quickly. Children didn't care that she couldn't speak. They loved her bright smile and her drawings and the way she always shared her snacks. One afternoon, I came home from work to find Emma in the backyard, exactly where Patricia had attacked her almost a year earlier. But everything was different now. Emma was dancing in the grass, spinning in circles with her arms outstretched. Butterflies, dozens of them, swirled around her like living confetti. She had planted a butterfly garden with Mrs. Yang's help, and now it was in full bloom. Monarchs and swallowtails and painted ladies filled the air. She saw me and ran over, her face glowing with joy. She held up her hands and signed, "I love you, Mama. Thank you for protecting me." I knelt down and pulled her into a hug. "I love you too, sweetheart. I will always protect you. Always." That night, after Emma was asleep, I sat in my office and opened my laptop. I had received an email from the National Center for Child Protection. They wanted me to speak at their annual conference about protecting vulnerable children and holding abusers accountable. I thought about Emma's journey. About her pain and fear, and about her incredible resilience. About how she had survived something no child should ever experience, and how she was now thriving, growing stronger every day. I thought about all the other children out there who might be suffering in silence, who might be vulnerable and afraid, who might not have someone to protect them. I typed my response, yes. I would be honored. Justice had been served. Patricia Morrison was in prison, her power and freedom stripped away forever. The money she had stolen had been returned. The people she had terrorized were finally free. But more important than revenge, more important than punishment, was what came after. My daughter was healing. She was happy. She was safe. And every night, I tucked her into bed, kissed her forehead, and whispered the same words, "You are strong. You are brave. You are loved. And no one will ever hurt you again." Emma would smile, sign "good night," and drift off to sleep, surrounded by drawings of butterflies and sunshine. The nightmare was over. The healing had begun. And my daughter, my beautiful, brave, silent warrior, was finally free to be exactly who she was meant to be. A child. Playing in the grass. Chasing butterflies. Living without fear. That was the greatest victory of all. Not the prison sentence. Not the financial restitution. Not even the justice that had been served. The greatest victory was seeing my daughter dance in the sunlight, surrounded by butterflies, her silent laughter more beautiful than any sound in the world. She was free. We were both free. And we would never let anyone take that freedom away from us again.